Okay, I think that we're ready. So, what I'm hopefully going to do is practice offering a presentation that I've prepared for a specific event, um, because it's important to me to be really clear about what it is that we're doing here. That this is science, that this is ongoing research, but that it's not mystical. It's just the way things work. It's the technology of the mechanism that is the human experience. And so let's talk about that. I'm going to switch over now so that you can see my content. And just think about this as okay? Think about this as a learning experience. This is a creative share between me and you. So I'm not presenting formalized research in this, nor am I trying to sell you anything. Okay? But I do want to create as much clarity about what this is as I can. And that clarity is an invitation to whoever receives it to get curious and to get excited and maybe reach out to me and have a question or an opinion or anything at all that gets activated for you by this work. I'm curious about what this is like for other people. So my name is Dr. Christina Jensen. I am a licensed doctor of physical therapy. I am a certified pelvic rehabilitation practitioner. I am a certified heart math practitioner. And this is where I spend my day, is in this little room. I have a larger space as well that you all have seen in some of these videos. This is where I spend my day, and I like to think that the rainbows do have a bit of a medicinal value. So, bright side integrative physical therapy is my business, and it is the bright side because it's the part that I share. And the dark side is everything that's happening on the inside of me while this is going on. And my body has been one of my greatest teachers in all of this. But that's where bright side comes from. And integrative physical therapy, because that's the work that we are engaging in, is to integrate various parts of ourself into a functional unit. And so I've included here a list of my special interests, and that is the framework and the starting paradigm that I'm coming from as we go. So what I'm really wanting to talk about is neurodevelopmental informed somatic physical therapy, which maybe I'll come up with a more marketable name for that later. But that's what it is. And so I want to break down what that means and how do we apply it clinically. So this is me, all of the things that I just said. And what I've also included here underneath my picture are some quotes that I remember hearing about myself from other people, particularly from adults, as I was growing up. Maybe that sounds familiar to some of you. So I'm a physical therapist, and the American Physical Therapy Association's vision, when they, organize as an organization and they write bylaws and mission statements and things like that, what they came up with for their vision is to transform society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience. Optimizing movement to improve the human experience. And that just sounded like gossamer butterfly wings to my brain when I heard that. I thought, that is beautiful, that is admirable, that is absolutely something that I can get passionate about. Transforming society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience, there's nothing about that not to love. So let me tell you a little bit more about me. Had some special interests, had some ideas that I pursued until I got bored with them. I always loved stories and narratives and science. Now, when I had my baby in 2010, I had been a very bookish person up until then. And as I mentioned earlier, people told me that I run weird and I slouch. So not a vision of athleticism. And I really struggled with that personal experience that I had. So after I had my baby, getting back into my body became a matter of survival for me. And I learned a lot about inhabiting my body through all of that, and I got excited about it, and I decided that I wanted to be a physical therapist. And so I went back to school, and in March of 2020, I jumped into the dream job, and then everything changed. So here's what I noticed, because in March 2020, things got stressful. Things got a little bit stressful for a lot of people. And things got a lot stressful for a lot of people too. And so in my position as a new grad pelvic health therapist, I started noticing patterns. I noticed some mechanical patterns. I noticed some nervous system patterns. And I noticed some environmental patterns. And burnout is an individual response to a systemic problem. But suddenly burnout was epidemic too. So what could be going on here? I asked myself. Let's talk about optimizing movement. Primitive motor milestones are something that we screen for in babies and kids. And I'm not a pediatric PT, I never have been, but this is what I learned in school is, the criteria that we are using to assess appropriate motor development. And if a baby skips a step, they miss crawling, they are having trouble navigating stairs, like something's happening with those primitive motor pattern skills, then we can use that to guide treatment in children. Now then, again, babies and kids, first 18 months of life. Some of these that I learned in school, we're checking them even into more like the toddler ages 2, 3, maybe even 4. But by the time a child starts school, there's a certain level of expectation on this child's ability to navigate their environment independently in the absence of any other pathologies. So all of these things, head support, body alignment, core control, etc., humans need to be able to do those. Now then, don't try to read all of this, but just see what jumps out at you. Retained primitive reflexes. So primitive reflexes primitive reflexes are also something that we look for in babies and kids. There are motor patterns that are inherited that every single one of us has at some point, even if it's just in utero. Some of these primitive reflexes, the actual act of the baby navigating through the birth canal helps to integrate these reflexes. It is a way of moving the unconscious body into a conscious version of that skill. And if that reflex fails to integrate, which can happen for any number of reasons, this is just an example of some of the symptoms that we might see. Poor balance, poor posture, easily startled and overwhelmed, sensory processing, time processing problems. Interesting. So I got to think about this. And this is my hypothesis, is that primitive reflexes and primal movement patterns equip the developing human to orient itself and safely explore its environment. Which way is up? Which way is down? Which way is forward? Which way is backwards? Can I touch this? Can I eat this? Right? Without these mechanisms, the organism cannot reliably establish safety, which drives a perpetually upregulated nervous system. This is our sympathetic system. This is our fight or flight, etc. Adrenaline, cortisol, activation. In this survival-oriented world, time moves strangely. Relationships are confusing, lights are brighter, sounds are sharper, and everything is just a bit more stressful. And all of this becomes a traumatic feedback pattern. This is my hypothesis. This is based on the clinical observations that I have made since I entered practice in March of 2020. Now let's establish the landscape that we're working in. Because March of 2020 was a traumatic time for our civilization. There was trauma there. So if nothing else, we all sort of have a shared experience. And for some people, it was more uncomfortable than others. But we all experienced this thing that happened. Now, for many people, obviously, there are layers to that. And that can include inherited traumas, which we understand that traumatic imprints affect genetic expression and can be retained in the genetic lineage. Now, what's interesting here is the symptom overlap and the way that everything meets in the middle. Imagining how these different states would bounce off of each other if, as I hypothesize, this is a feedback pattern. This is like holding a microphone up to a speaker. Just so we're clear. So let's remember why all of this matters. Is that as a physical therapist, I share the vision to transform society by optimizing movement to improve the human experience. Now we can shorten that up a little bit to transform society by improving the human experience. What do you think? Okay. What does somatic mean? Somatic means that the mind and the body are focusing on the same thing at the same time, that there is coherent communication happening between brain and body, between the physical mechanism and the awareness of it. So psyche-soma is the Jungian dichotomy, so it recognizes the physical body as a counterpart to the personal psychology. They're not separate. They're always in contact with each other, whether consciously or unconsciously. So just the terminology somatic acknowledges that. What it also does is it restores the body as a familiar, safe place. We mentioned the role of safety earlier. And it's going to teach self-regulation because it's going to expand on the capacity of that awareness to pay attention to what's happening in the body. Our bodily self-awareness can be impacted in many ways by many things. But the ability to observe oneself is a skill. And that's what somatic therapy can expand. Physical therapy, I really like because it offers practical solutions for real functional challenges. Let's talk about pain. Let's talk about mobility. Let's talk about how much effort does it take to get in and out of bed in the morning, to lift up a box of cat litter, to prepare a meal for family. Functional challenges, practical solutions. Now, by working bottom up through the body, addressing the central nervous system with our somatic practices, addressing the primitive reflexes, addressing these sensory motor systems that are existing really below consciousness, at least most of the time. Like when we're going through our daily activities, we are not telling ourselves, breathe in, breathe out. But we can, if we want to. We can make it that complicated, but otherwise our body's going to default to homeostasis and it's going to take care of those kinds of things itself. But all of these, we can build exercises around. We can build strength building strategies for these developmental systems. And that's what we're talking about when we describe bottom up processing. And over time, what this does is it develops the body into a trustworthy mechanism. And trustworthy is kind of another word for safe. But it's like, I know what my body's going to be capable of. I know what kind of environment I'm capable of navigating successfully. What kind of situation am I capable of navigating successfully? So that my very survival is no longer constantly being questioned by my unconscious. So when these somatic practices and these bottom-up approaches start to merge together, this is what we're accomplishing. Is we're establishing practical safety with dynamic regulation, meaning it's ongoing, just like my little pendulum here. And the result is embodied competence. I just kind of like the way that sounds. And this is what's happening, is that the physical body, the mind, and the brain and the hardware, not just the electricity, but the wiring itself, all of that's working together in novel ways now. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next couple slides, but I want you to know that this stuff is in here. So very briefly, here's some evidence that you can look at about some of my concepts here. Reversing disorders in adults is very fledgling, if not fringe, but the question is out there, and that's what we'd like to think that, right? Here's about the joint hypermobility. One of the things that I noticed in my COVID population, in my post-COVID population, in my pelvic health population, a lot of joint hypermobility with dysautonomia, which just means central dysregulation, and also pain, particularly complex, confusing pain. Retained primitive reflexes belong in this conversation and have been considered in a few different ways for intervention in neurodivergent spectrum disorders. And then this one I think is really important for us to notice here is that autistic people are thinking about and dying by suicide at high rates, 25 times more likely to make a suicide attempt than non-autistic adults. Now, we're talking about neurodivergence and neurodevelopmental disorders with a very broad brush here, but to me, that sounds like an emergency. All right, so let's talk about optimizing the human experience then, right? Quality of life. Hypermobile spectrum symptoms are uncomfortable and they're confusing. Retained primitive reflexes create confusion in the embodied experience, which will contribute to mechanical problems and autonomic dysregulation. Stress levels are higher because the body is working harder and the brain is working harder and the mind is working harder than maybe it needs to. And over time, you're going to get executive fatigue and you're going to get some mood disorders likely creeping in here. So what can physical therapy do about these things in particular? A lot, actually. Thank you for asking. So evidence-based PT solutions from Brightside, hypermobile spectrum support. Strength and conditioning for that population has to be done carefully and with an understanding of that particular individual's manifestation on this spectrum. Manual therapy is very appropriate and helpful for this population. Manual therapy is when I put my hands on somebody and we move and we mobilize the tissue and we mobilize the joint and we apply stimulation to the body in a way that elicits conversation. Integrating primitive reflexes, a lot we can do there. We can build exercises around this, and there's evidence to support that. VOR has to do with our ability to focus our visual field. And vestibular is going to have to do with inner ear and balance. Manual therapy can help here too. Autonomic regulation, it's a lot more than relaxation. We've got to learn how to modulate, how to calibrate, how to activate and deactivate as well, so that we can establish something that resembles a regulated pattern. Manual therapy can help too. And then finally, my intention is that all of this together creates empowering, embodied experiences that are not overwhelming, but they are progressive in their level of complexity so that the individual is grown by these experiences. And you know what? Gamification, creative framework, we can make this fun. We can make this fun. It's supposed to be fun. So we're going to improve the human experience by doing all of these things. I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I know that we're going long. Safety, competency, sensory processing. Get comfortable. Get in your body and get comfortable. Now, we can also improve the human experience, though, by recognizing that the psyche, the individual psychology and their definitions and beliefs and experiences and cultural context and social context and all of those types of things are going to play a role in this work. And so we can offer cognitive scaffolding, going back to when I wore a hat as a biology teacher and a teacher of learning theory, is that we can use cognitive scaffolding of well-established systems that might be helpful. It's just a way to look at information and to organize information. And something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs that places our bodily needs right at the base of that triangle that's like, listen, you need to have a safe place to sleep tonight before you can start thinking about what to write a book about. Before we can get into that higher level metacognition, which is how we access our executive function, by the way, like, before we can get there, we have to be okay in our body. And just to have the validation of that not only is it okay to have needs, but it's inescapable. And Eastern philosophy has a lot to say about that as well. Shadow work, parts work, these are terms that have started to emerge simply because we are talking about parts. We're talking about the physical body and the psychology and the underpinning physiology. These are all different parts that are working synergistically, or at least we hope they are. And so there's some things that we can bring in with that idea. And like I said, it's supposed to be fun. Creative individuation. So we can tell stories, and we carry stories in our body. And so many of us have been waiting for permission to take ownership of our own story. And if there's anything that I can get excited about, it's to be that voice and to hold a space of safe permission for people to step into their agency. And how do we do that? All kinds of ways. All kinds of ways. So this is what a day in the life of my clinic looks like. We're telling stories, we're moving, we're rolling around on the floor, we are swaying side to side, we are integrating those primitive reflexes. The model in the upper right corner has a laser attached to her head because we are integrating our gaze and attention. All kinds of things. Further research is needed, though. I need help with this. I need help with this. What difference does it make? I don't know. I can't tell you. I have formulated a hypothesis, and I wanted to tell you about it. So these are some questions that I have. The truth is that there's a well-recognized lag time between research and clinical practice of about 17 years. That's what they told me in school. 17 years. That's someone's entire childhood. That is the window of neurodevelopment. Quality research requires resources, time, and teamwork. Resources, time, and teamwork. But we've got to close that gap. We've got to close that 17-year gap. And so in the meantime, we work with the research that we have, and we do good work paying attention to what's happening and observe this like scientists. Clients at Brightside, people who are working with me, people who have contributed to my work so far, you all are explorers in evolving the human experience. And whether you come in and work with me one-on-one, or whether you just take some of these ideas and bring them into the center of you and let them swirl around a little bit. That's the research that's needed. How does it work for you? I'd be curious to know. Okay. The end. Man, we made it right under 30 minutes. Oh, yeah, here's my pretty little end slide. This is a quote from me that I've been saying for a while. These are some books that have been really supporting my learning. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to leave that there so that this can just be available. Let me know what you think. I'm easy to get in touch with, and thank you so much for being here and receiving this, and until next time.